Well, welcome everybody to our clergy convocation, the first of its kind being offered by Beit Kaplan. Beit Kaplan is the Rabbinic Partnership for Jewish Peoplehood, and we're very happy to be together. And I offer my congratulations to all of us who have gotten through most of Tishrei. But I'm not going to take a lot of time chatting. I'm going to turn this right over to Rabbi Rebecca Lillian, who is over there in Copenhagen.
Hello, everybody. It is great to see you in wherever you are, Sukkah or room. And I am going to say how this came about and what we're going to do. We were talking, some of us in the, you don't need to unmute. I think you will be allowed to unmute at some point when we have a group conversation, but I am not in charge of any of them. But a group of us were talking in Beit Kaplan, which if you are not a member of and would like to be, you'll hear more about that later, about what we would really like to have. And a lot of us realized that figuring out how exactly to celebrate Simchat Torah as the year-long has gone into over a year-long of the hostages and the war, having mutual support for this, for clergy, in all of us, but in particular clergy who are facilitating these holidays for other people, that would be very welcome. And so that's what we're going to do tonight. And I'll just explain briefly how this will be. We are going to have three colleagues who are each going to talk about different aspects of what it means to be celebrating, especially Simchat Torah, post October 7th. And they will each introduce themselves. And after they've each introduced themselves, they'll each speak for some minutes, and then there will be a chance for a conversation with everybody after that. The part that we are recording will be the speakers, so you don't have to worry about being uncomfortable being recorded because you won't be. And with that, I will just say, I wish I were in a sukkah. I live in an apartment in Copenhagen and I don't have one. And I hope some of you are in one, but I hope you are all, to the best of your ability, enjoying the holiday, Moedim L'Simcha. And I will, our speakers are Rabbi Noah Kitty in Florida, Rabbi David Evan Markus in that omniscient Westchester County, California, New York, and Gail Diamond for Hadassah, Israel. And I will let them each introduce themselves in that order: Noah, and then Gail, and then David.
So, Moedim L'Simcha, everyone. I am inside, not in a sukkah, but feeling the joy of the holiday. I am recently retired pulpit rabbi, very happily retired. I think everyone should retire and then work at your leisure. I've been in Florida for 20 years, and it's a very interesting state to be in. And I hope everyone who has been affected by the recent hurricanes is finding themselves back together and on dry land. I recently wrote a book on anti-Semitism called "Thank You, Anti-Semites. We were grasshoppers in our own eyes until you convinced us we were giants." And I'll speak a little bit about that and turn it over to Gail.
I am Gail Diamond. I'm in Sor Hadassah, Israel. I'm not a congregational rabbi. I'm a very active lay leader here, as well as a teacher. And I envision this as a chance to show you all my sukkah, but mainly as a chance for clergy to get together and offer one another support at this time and talk about some of the pressing issues in our lives. So Johanna Kinberg couldn't be with us, and so I will be taking her place on the panel tonight. And I'm turning it over to David, who will be our first speaker.
Thank you, Gail. Moadim l'simcha, everybody. If you're not in a sukkah, ufos aleinu sukach lamecha. I am speaking to you from my courthouse in New York State. In addition to being a pulpit rabbi, I serve in the New York State Judiciary. But thankfully, I'm not speaking to you today in that capacity. I am the pulpit leader of Congregation Jeremy in Greenwich, Connecticut. I'm also on the teaching faculty at the Academy for Jewish Religion, the Pluralist Seminary here in New York, and I am Rabbinic Chair of Beit Building Jewish. When I received the invitation, and I'm so delighted to be with Beit Kaplan today to talk a bit about how can we celebrate Simchat Torah this year, about 26 seconds after I got that invitation, I saw things like this on my social media feed. Let's keep their memory alive. Let's keep dancing. It underscored the necessity of the question that given all that this year has been, and especially the secular anniversary of October 7th that just passed, and now the Jewish anniversary, there's no one among us and no one whom we serve that isn't with this question. How do we keep the memory alive? And how do we honor Simchat Torah? As a way into this conversation, I want to tell a story about a friend of mine who on July 20 posted also to social media. We all know what happened on July 19. Right off Ben Yehuda Street in Tel Aviv, there were a Houthi rocket attack from Yemen, and we know what happened. But the very next day, on July 20, right around the corner from the site, there were folks in the cafes just as they always were. And surely they knew what had happened. Everybody knows in Israel what's happening. If you have an iPhone or a J phone or a K phone, you know immediately what's happening. So people weren't unaware. And my friend posted to social media, it's incredible. Right around the corner from this destruction and all it represented just the day before, people are out there sipping their hafuch and reading their papers. Are they resilient or are they disloyal to the shock and the horror and the memory of those who died? Are they profoundly disconnected with what's happening, or lehefech, are they profoundly connected? Are they emotionally engaged or are they numb? And his question became my question with my congregation, because of course the answer is in the eye of the beholder. We in the United States, who are theoretically safely distant from what's happening, may have a different perspective on our question. But yet it impacts us very deeply, just as it impacted my friend who posted about this. So maybe it would help to take a step back and ask, what does it mean to rejoice? We use in English the words happiness and joy quite easily, eliding between them. Hebrew, I think, takes a bit of a different position, and Greek takes a bit of a different position. We sing Asherei Yoshvei Veitecha. We see in Psalm 2, Asherei Ha'ish, the happy is the person who. But in Hebrew, Oshel does not connote happy, happy, joy, joy. It connotes an Aristotelian notion of the good life, eudaimonia in Greek. Joy is simcha. This is the hedonic, elevated experience of joy. And they're different in Hebrew, and they're different in Jewish life. And it's important for us to keep that in mind, that what we are ostensibly invited, if not commanded, to do is to be in simcha, which raises the stakes quite a bit. Because we as a people have experienced a great deal. They're out to get us, let's eat. We're poised atop the roof where the fiddler on the roof is trying to eke out a tune. I was reminded before our session began that actually the original story did not include that, but it's become this metaphor for a people always poised and trying to make music anyway? And how can we have joy when we're embracing a Torah and a Tanakh that is frankly full of rumbles from Cain and Abel on? And can it even be commanded at all? The very notion that emotion can be commanded conflicts somewhat with our Western liberal approach. I feel, therefore I am, I have autonomy to feel, and emotion isn't a choice. But there's so much in our tradition that actually imagines otherwise. Na'aseh v'nishma, we are taught. The neurobiologists among us know that if we smile, we actually might be happier, whether or not we mean it. That there's something about mirror neurons where my emotion is catchy to your emotion, which, by the way, is why if somebody else yawns, I'm likely to. The mirror neurons are going to fire. And especially at this season, even without October 7th, this season is full of anxiety. Back in the day, Simchat Torah, where our ancestors would pour the last of their water on the altar as if to say to the God of their imagination or the God of community experience or their creator on whom they all depended for water, all right, God, we so rely on you, we so trust you that we're going to pour the last of our water at the end of our Mediterranean summer, as if to say, now you'd better save us. And at the same time they did that, it was such a party. Mishnah Sukkah records that you ain't never seen a party like you saw at Simchat Beit HaShoeva. And if you have never seen Simchat Beit HaShoeva, you have never seen joy. That joy could actually be twinned with anxiety, fear of death, notwithstanding what we individually feel. To this, I'd like to add, and this is the text that I'd like to spend my remaining moment on. These materials from the Yesh Kodesh. This is the Piasetzner Rebbe, the rabbi of the Warsaw Ghetto, who had a lot of skin in the game. He had a Simchat Torah like we do. He had a Purim like we do. And he was keenly aware of what was happening outside the ghetto walls. And he was keenly aware of what was happening inside the ghetto walls. So his question for Purim was much like our question now. Hadar also has come up with this teaching, so B'Shem Amra. He goes to the Tikkunei Zohar, which cites this notion that some of us have heard, that Purim is like Yom Kippur. Purim ke Purim. And what's meant by this is that on Yom Kippur, one doesn't engage in ta'anit, one doesn't fast, one doesn't do tshuva, just if you feel like it. If you believe in commandedness or taking on the mitzvot, by whatever means that is meaningful to you, you do that notwithstanding what you feel, because this is a chok. It's a decree of the Holy One of blessing. And so too for the joy of Purim. That was his move. And it doesn't matter if you're already happy, in meaning joyful in simcha, or if your situation is disposed to joy. To the contrary, he writes, even if one is deflated, brokenhearted, the mind and all one's spirit trampled, still it's a hook that nevertheless we must seek any spark of joy we can and hachnis it, take it in, enter it into our hearts. Just as Yom Kippur itself atones, even if our tshuva does not feel shalem, so too with Purim. And while I don't like particularistic language myself, it seems useful here given the context. Even if an Ish Yisraeli, even if an Israelite isn't as in joy as might be, should be, and therefore one's sense of spiritual service isn't complete, even so, and this is the move, the salvation and joy that Purim actualizes for Israel still actualizes and manifests. We do this not in disloyalty to the circumstance. We do this lehefech, because our capacity to choose joy and embrace joy is not based on circumstance. It's based on agency. And that's a darn hard move to make when we're not personally feeling joyful, and especially when the circumstances are the exact opposite. Of this, my dear friend, Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt, who blogs as the Velveteen Rabbi, writes, "We are obligated to welcome into our hearts whatever tiny spark of joy we can find. This isn't spiritual bypassing, which is the experience we all have of running into spiritual life for the purpose of getting around hard things or covering them up. It isn't that. And it isn't putting on a happy face. It's a spiritual practice, a spiritual discipline of opening our hearts, even in difficult circumstances, so some measure of blessing can flow in." Of all people, the Eish Kodesh was writing from the Warsaw Ghetto. He knew something about the difficult circumstances. This is a radical teaching. It was radical when he wrote it in 1940. It was radical when it was found in 1960. It's radical today. And I think it puts in stark relief my friend's question of July 20. Are our Israeli cousins who sit around at the cafe right around the corner from the Houthi bombing, are they out to lunch, so to speak? Are they disconnected? No. They're affirming life. They are affirming the entirety of what their civilization, our civilization, the wisdom traditions of our people call them into, that form of resilience. All the more so on the anniversary of October 7, when we come together to reboot Torah and everything that Torah represents to us. We don't do so in a saccharine way. We don't do so in an out to lunch way. We do so in the deep spiritual practice of choosing simcha, even when our hearts lie panting on the floor. And for those of us who will find this challenging, please know that there's a whole people that will be collectively doing this, as our ancestors have done for hundreds and hundreds of years. Maybe the circumstances aren't the same, but our capacity to choose simcha and collective resilience is part of what makes us us. And I thank Beit Kaplan for uplifting that calling of our people. Yibati.
Yasher Koach.
Yes, you go. Oh, okay. So, again, welcome, and as a really sincere thank you for being invited to be on this panel. I think essentially what I want to talk about is having a positive mindset, which is absolutely related to what David just brilliantly spoke about. I see Simchat Torah, and I'm reading from a prepared text so I don't wander, because, wander Jew. I see Simchat Torah as celebrating the Torah, which is the how-to Jew book of our people. I believe that we were solidified, if not born, alongside the Torah. So as we celebrate the book, we also celebrate our people. The Torah has been our guide, offering both positive lessons on how to be better people, as well as cautionary tales of what can happen when we fall short of our goals or even intentionally turn away from them. As I mentioned, I recently wrote a book, Thank You, Anti-Semites. We were grasshoppers in our own eyes until you convinced us we were giants. I believe the subtitle is more than just a catchy phrase. Our enemies who are on paper and in the real world, much more significant in terms of numbers and influence. And they have raised us up to be their equal and beyond. They see us as capable of accomplishing greatness, if not the impossible. In other words, if a lion makes war against a mouse, the lion must believe there is something about the mouse that makes it worthy of being an enemy. Otherwise, why bother with it? Remember the cartoon Mighty Mouse who exclaimed, "Here I am to save the day." Before early Christianity designated us as having special powers, we were frankly at war with each other. The Pharisees and Sadducees were not friends. Neither were Hellenized Jews pals with the Maccabees. It was the anti-Semites who actually reminded us that we were one people bound to and born from one Torah and united in one purpose, which was not everyone needs to be Jewish, but was to teach the world that it is possible to right wrongs, to feed the hungry, to house the homeless, to care for the vulnerable, and ultimately bring peace to the world. The tragedy of the October 7th massacre was brutal and heartbreaking. To me, they were martyrs who were killed because they were Jews, seen by our enemies as special, if not unique, who have the gall, the nerve, to finally refuse to be the dhimmis, the second-class citizens we've always been in the Arab world, until the miracle of the establishment of the State of Israel. I believe we honor their sacrifice by being better Jews, more Jewish than we thought we could be, and to celebrate ourselves as our enemies see us, strong, capable, responsible, united, and genius. That is something to be celebrated, which we do on Simchat Torah. Despite the centuries Jews have spent under the authority of Arab and then Muslim countries, our philosophical viewpoints are undeniably Western and particularly Greek. We search out the nature of things, we examine the source of truth about our world, we discuss the concept of free will, we debate the goal of our ultimate purpose. It seems to me that we've comfortably settled on the idea that what God wants from us is to be better people, to figure out how to improve our lives as Jews, as well as the lives of the people we live among. It can be difficult to remember that we've created our identity as Jews while living as a subordinate people in one precarious situation after another, completely dependent upon a combination of goodwill, greed, and political expediency of the ruler of whose country we were permitted to live in. And make no mistake, until 1948, the only country we could reasonably agitate to remain as citizens has been the US, having been thrown out of almost every other country we resided in. Whatever flaws we might complain about here, I hope we keep in mind that we are able to publicly complain about them, run for office, create organization to address those flaws, and live where we please. Doing something is always better than simply complaining about the other guy, because the other guy is not going to change their mind just because you want them to. We've been trying to change the minds of people who hated us for almost 2,000 years, and our words have had much less of an impact than our actions and responses in all of the countries where we found ourselves. We became an international people, whether we were exiled, fled, or simply migrated for better opportunities. In almost every place we landed, we worked to be of use to the larger community and the ruling authority. We became merchants and traders because we maintained contacts with the places we left. We learned multiple languages. We promoted literacy within our communities. Wherever possible, we joined the cultural and scientific societies so that life would be cleaner, more efficient, more competitive, more beautiful, more pleasant, more prosperous, not just for us, but for everyone we lived among. There were even times when our contributions were acknowledged uniquely, such as the time when the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid II famously sent his Ottoman navy to Spain to safely evacuate Jews fleeing the Inquisition and allowing us to settle in Ottoman territories, primarily in Istanbul and Thessaloniki. He did this not out of the goodness of his heart, but because he knew how much the Jewish people could benefit his empire. I want folks to have at the forefront of their minds, since the first pagan Greeks and the ensuing anti-Semites throughout history have complained how well the Jews were doing and how they thought that was wrong and shouldn't be allowed to happen, that we have responded by maintaining our excellence and insisting on being a benefit and blessing wherever we have lived. I salute and appreciate the many ways our people and our leaders have responded to anti-Semitism, and I believe they all have a positive effect. For myself, I encourage other Jews to continue doing and being what we have always done, which is to frustrate the ones who hate us and want to see us fail by continuing to learn, to study, to continue to improve our world and the world around us. It's how we honor all those who came before us, the giants on whose shoulders we stand, who believe the stories we read in the Torah, and that we were created with the intention to strive for excellence and to be a benefit. Thank you. And now to Gail.
Yasher Koach.
I want to thank Noah and David and say that I'm the person who had the least amount of time to prepare a presentation for tonight because I'm replacing Johanna to talk about Jewish spirituality in a time of terror and brokenness. So the first thing I want to say is I've been editing a bunch of articles this year written by scholars from the School of Social Work at Bar Ilan University. First of all, I've just been in awe of academics in Israel, and specifically of the professors of social work who have taken the opportunity of the terrible circumstances that have been going on in the country to research and investigate and find out what's working and find out what people are doing and the mechanisms that people are using. And so one of the scholars who I've edited a lot of work of hers, her name is Dr. Ayelet Oreg, and she and her colleagues have been using something called terror management theory to discuss the responses of people in Israel to the events that occurred last October and the ensuing war. And terror management theory posits that we have a number of anxiety buffers that we use that help us cope with the fear of death, with what they call mortality salience. So when things happen, such as the events of last October 7th, people feel their lives to be at risk and come face to face with death in any number of ways. People hold on to those things that they use as anxiety buffer mechanisms. So one of those is having a worldview. Whatever your particular worldview was before the events of October 7th, you are likely to hold on to it more strongly and to seek to increase your self-esteem by doing things in concordance with that worldview. So for instance, a lot of people believed prior to October 7th that it was good to do acts of kindness and caring to support the community. And we've seen a massive increase in volunteerism all over Israel over the course of the past year. But other things in the Israeli worldview, for instance, the importance of family, have led to a series of spontaneous war weddings, have led to the birth of many children, and so on and so forth. Because another piece of anxiety buffer mechanisms is holding tightly to attachments, to people who we're close to. So we can see that in the weddings, and we can see that in people who reach out to their families or seek connection with people both living and dead. So there's been all kinds of different ways that people have memorialized the people who were killed, and certainly all kinds of ways that people have kept the presence of the hostages visible in Israeli culture over the past year. And that notion that we would hold on more tightly to our worldviews after an event that threatens our lives comes into play in ways that we see unity and disunity in the Jewish community right now, and I'm going to come back to that. But I also want to focus on some of the aspects of Jewish spirituality that I have found important or easy or difficult during this period. Sorry about my dogs. So I turn very quickly to the Psalms, which is one of my favorite places to look for guidance. I was a little nervous this week about reciting Hallel on Sukkot, but what I actually found was that many of the Psalms really do speak about experiences of threats of death. Lo netanani lamavet, you have, I have been in danger, but I have not been given over to death. Lo ametim hallelujah, the dead shall not praise God, which fall differently on my ears this year than perhaps on past Sukkots. But we find that the Psalms contain a multitude of emotions, and even the celebratory Psalms of Hallel actually contain many of the negative emotions that we might be feeling. I also want to mention Jewish learning. Personally, I have not found difficulty in Jewish learning this year. I have not found that the events of October 7th have stymied me in Jewish learning or made me want to stop learning. They have brought some very intense learning sessions as people bring to the table everything that's going on with them. And one of the things that we do in Jewish learning, in Chavruta or in small group learning or in larger group learning, is we allow people to bring their whole selves to the table. It's not therapy, and it is an attempt to bring the texts of the past to bear on the present. But people certainly also bring their present to bear on those texts. And I've seen that this year in Jewish learning. I think the place where I've heard a lot of people speak about difficulties is prayer. I was in the sukkah of a colleague of mine today, this week. Mira Hovav opened her sukkah for a gathering of people of different backgrounds. And she spoke about the challenges of the different prayers that we say and how many of the prayers feel empty or feel difficult or feel challenging. I know for myself that I started a daily prayer group. It was many of you know about it. Some of you are in it. We had a group that used to meet for Hallel since the pandemic. And since Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan last year, right after the events of October 7th, we've been meeting daily 6 days a week, except for Shabbat and holidays, on Zoom for 15 minutes a day, and saying prayers for the hostages and for the state of Israel and for the soldiers. And I go through different places with it. That some days I just feel like, oh my God, I can't believe we're still saying this and what we've prayed for hasn't happened. And other days, it's a very strong anchor for me to know that I can reach out in prayer during this time. I want to close by talking about community. I'm speaking later tonight about Achdut, Jewish unity. And it's a topic that's very, very close to my heart. I'm a person who davens in a lot of different synagogues. I have strong relationships in the Orthodox community in my town, and also very active in leading a Reform congregation. And I pride myself in being able to have connections with people across the spectrum. And this year has been an enormous challenge. I have said, and my friend Rabbi Mira Chovav also mentioned to me that Rabbi Avi Dabush had also said something similar, that anybody who didn't do, that everybody needs to do Cheshbon Nefesh after October 7th, 2023, that every Jewish person has to ask ourselves, where am I at fault? How can I change? What do I need to do to make the world that I want to see? And what Rabbi Hovav told me that Rabbi Dabush said is any person who hasn't changed their mind at all since October 7th isn't paying attention. That all of us have thinking to do. All of us have questions to ask. The events that happened have to challenge all of us. Noah spoke very beautifully, and I'm speaking about Achdut tonight, and I have an article from Dr. Avi Sagi that's published on the Hartman website in Hebrew that I've been using, and he talks about the connection of the Jewish people and the covenant. He talks about a Brit Goral and a Brit Ye'ud. So a Brit Goral is that we have a common fate, but a Brit Ye'ud is that we have a common purpose. And I think Noah spoke very beautifully about that common purpose that we as a Jewish people are meant to have. Dr. Sagi also talks about the problem with idealization of the Jewish people. He says a lot of people think that they know what the Jewish people are and what the Jewish people are meant to be. And don't confuse me with the facts. So if I have this idealized view of who the Jews are, and for instance, for me, Jews are Zionists, Jews care about the state of Israel, whatever ideas I might have about the Jewish people can be belied by the reality of who the Jewish people are. And I may have an idealized view that the Jewish people all agree with one another, or that we should have some kind of unity of caring for one another. But in fact, the Jewish community has been divided for many years over many issues. And as my colleague Rebecca was saying before the program, that there have always been divisions. The Jews have always been arguing with one another. And those are you can find the asmachta for that, the proof for that in rabbinic texts that I'll be bringing later tonight. And if anybody would like the source sheet in Hebrew, I'm happy to provide it. So Dr. Sagi talks about how this idealized view of the Jewish people, or an idealized view of what the state of Israel should be, gets in the way of us really seeing and hearing the person in front of us. And that what we have to work towards if we want to really talk about Achdut is and unity is being able to be in the presence and listening to and open to views that are different from ours and still being together in community. Now, I know you know that this is not a problem just in the Jewish community or in the state of Israel. You can open any newspaper in the United States and many other countries. You see the problems of polarization that are occurring everywhere. And people will tell you algorithms, and people will tell you the internet, and people will tell you technology, society, whatever it is. We are all living in communities that have challenges of how to listen to one another and how to maintain community and caring with people who we disagree with. So these are the challenges that we face in the wake of October 7th. I believe they are spiritual challenges. And I have a lot of belief and hope in, as Noah was speaking and as David was speaking, in the wisdom of our tradition of all of the multifaceted voices, and in the power of our history, and in the power of our communities to help us navigate these treacherous waters. So thanks so much for letting me present tonight, and I'm looking forward to hearing what other people have to say.
Yasher Koach. Thank you all
Yasher
so much.
Koach to all of you. It was really so moving. It was really moving to hear each one of you. And I appreciate you all so very much. And now we have some time. We have about 20 minutes, I think, for discussion. And what I'm just going to ask is if it is at all possible to, thank you, Jamie, to put your videos back on. I understand while we're having presentations, people liking to have the video off, but if we're going to be having a conversation, it's so much nicer to see your faces. So, hi, Howard. So that would be great. For those of you who could do it. It is, what I'd like to do is start off if anybody has particular questions of any of the speakers, and then it will also be fine just to add your own comments. They were, all three presentations were so inspiring. I'm sure it inspired some thought in each of us. But does anybody have a particular question for any of our three speakers? Okay, then, if anybody has anything they'd like to say, please raise your hand. You can raise your regular hand or your Zoom hand. Howard.
Yeah, I have a quick question for Noah. Where is your book available? Is it published?
Not yet.
Okay.
It'll be published in the early February.
Okay, good. Let us know.
Will do. Thank you.
Seriously, a bunch of rabbis plus a cantor, and you're not talking?
And a microphone.
I will just say, when Gail quoted me about what I said earlier, what I really said was they were canceling each other in the Warsaw Ghetto. That's how bad it was among the Jews. I study resistance, and they were canceling each other over how to resist the Nazis. I mean, we come from crazy people, but here we are.
So I wonder, all of you, because I think the idea of joy as a mitzvah is at the heart of one of the challenges of sort of the mitzvah model as somewhat coercive. Like, how do we coerce joy? How do we demand joy? And I think it's really interesting running through your three presentations, because obviously, David, you kind of go right at that, and Noah, there's this question of responding to a world that demands us not be joyful and demands us be defensive, and to turn it around and do joy instead. And Gail, I wonder if in the Brit Goral and the Brit Yad of Dr. Sagi, if there's also sort of almost a Brit Simcha in Achdut as well. So I figured throw that back at the three of you to maybe think or comment.
I think it's really easy, Jonathan. I mean, obviously, you're right. And in the nature of Fiddler on the Roof, you're right and you're right. How can you both be right? You know what? You're also right. But it's real easy to send the notion of commandedness down the toilet for whatever reason we would do so, and thereby evade what to me seems the deeper question, whether it's commanded by a commander or we collectively take on. To me, it's the same, ve'ahavta. What does that mean? Right? So we face that every day of our lives, whether we say so or not. We might as well say so. And if we're going to be in that place, why not bring that deeply into the question of what we mean by simcha, whether it's commanded and we choose it, or we choose to be chosen and we choose it, or we say, you know what? It's propedeutic, to use a Maimonidean approach to this. It's good for you, right? To be able to make this choice, to put some WD-40 under our stuckedness, or to be able to hold nuance and complexity together, or by the notion that simcha individually is not fully possible, that there's a collectivity to the term of art simcha in this sense, where the whole really is greater than the sum of our parts. Wherever that comes from, whatever our relationship with commandedness is, I think that's the deeper question. And I would put it more as an opportunity, whether or not we call it, as the Pia Setzner called it, a chova from putatively on high. I think Kol v'chomer, it's really important for us to embrace that now, for the reasons that Gail talked about so beautifully. And I think for the reasons that we're all experiencing, it's hard to be us right now. It's hard to be a person. So why would we not embrace the totality of human experience and the totality of our tradition's wisdom, which includes being able to pick ourselves up by our bootstraps? This feels really important and not disloyal to the memory of those who have lost. And I want to underscore, I don't know anyone who died on October 7 or October 8 or October 9. So if there is someone in that space, we need to be able to hold that as a community as well.
I've been thinking for months about my friend Hillary Faberman, who lives down the street, and she does an annual sufganiyot tasting with her family and publishes the results of the best sufganiyot at Hanukkah in a blog post. You can look for it this year. And last year she had real questions about whether to do it or not, but somebody said to her, "You're alive, act like it," which to me is another way of saying "Lo hametim hallelujah." And it's difficult, and there are even times when I feel like I'm outside the national mood, if I'm inappropriately happy. For instance, I love my work and I work with children, so every day I have an opportunity to get out of myself in an educational setting, and you don't stay down for very long. And literally on October 7th, Motzei Chag, my school had a Zoom where they got all the teachers together, and they were already talking about resilience and how we were going to promote resilience in our students. And I started out on a whirlwind tour of Zoom workshops about resilience. And yeah, so that's what I have to say about Commanded for Joy. That, you're alive, act like.
I think also it has a sense of connecting with humility, meaning that, I write about this, that a zebra is always going to be a zebra. that, you know, a giraffe is always going to be a giraffe. They might be taller than some, that might be stronger or weaker, whatever, but a giraffe is always going to be a giraffe. We have not yet come to the conclusion of what it is to be human, that we are actually always evolving. And again, to my mind, this is what Torah really encourages us to do, to explore and expand what it means to be human. And if we allow ourselves to rely on our what we've done in the past, or what our kishkis want us to do, you know, like someone insults us, so I want to punch him in the nose. Well, I mean, okay, but how is that going to advance anything? And how is that going to evolve anything? So when we are called to, when we, you know, sometimes we have to be ordered. You know, it's like when you train a child, you simply have to tell them, no, you have to do X, Y, Z, because I don't want you to behave like a 2-year-old your entire life, that you have to grow up. And as we as adults, you know, so often we think, oh, you know, I'm an adult, I don't have to grow up anymore. And I think what Torah really calls us to do, and the best among us call each other to do, is to be actually better today than we were yesterday. And just because, not just because, but in the face of real tragedy and real danger, and actually, you know, being on a very precarious living situation, we're, you know, don't stay there. Don't believe that this is all there is, that we must be better. So when we're commanded to be joyful, I mean, I remember, goodness, almost 30 years ago, there was an incident that happened right before Purim, and it was devastating, and a number of people were killed. And we were discussing, should we cancel Purim? And I'm like, you know, if we canceled every holiday because of something tragic that happened to our people, we would have been done with 2,000 years ago. So, you know, and I think I remember reading something about Shapira that you know, even in the ghetto, and having very little hope that he would walk out of there, that he took a Kiddush cup and made Kiddush and said, I, you know, however much I can, I'm going to draw on joy and be joyful, so that whoever comes after me won't forget how to be joyful. And that's what I share with people, that if we're not, we're doomed. If we stop, we're doomed. And I don't want to be doomed. I mean, too many people have come before me and suffered immeasurable harm and devastation and terror and suffering, for me to say, I don't really feel it, I'm just going to skip it. So yeah.
I'm reminded of the Nachman teaching, pulling from Gail's comment that, you know, we're all reaching for, you know, whatever way we can bulwark ourselves against the existential onslaught. So Nachman teaches that sometimes you have to make the depression dance. And I imagine that Nachman, you know, our patron saint of depression, knew what he was talking about, not because it was easy, but lehefech, because it was darn hard. Sometimes we dance while we cry. Sometimes we dance with the Torah and we shed tears for the empty seats and all the above, but we don't not celebrate Simchat Torah. We don't not celebrate Purim. We don't not make the Kiddush. We just get to hold more, and we have to hold more as we do.